Let's try that again. So you should all be able to see my screen now. You'll all be muted, but we do want you to interact. So please feel free to send us your questions, and thanks to whoever sent the question about sharing the screen. What is this about? Well, I said this was a bit different. What we're going to do is we're going to have a bit more of a panel discussion, and I'll explain who's here, but we're going to talk about some topics. The people that we have are myself, Rob Vanstone. I'm the Technical Director of Zebia Labs here in the UK. Zebia Labs aim to help organisations ship software better and faster with less risk. And I'm joined here by Priya Raju.
Hi, this is Priya here, and I'm Service Director for Sendata Technologies. As an organization, we've been helping our customers in the DevOps space in the capacity of advisory and technology consulting. And that's me today.
Okay, and we're also joined by Barry Chandler, who's a DevOps champion, and he's the founder of SEAM.
Hi everyone. Yeah, just for those who don't know what SEAM is the Study of Enterprise Agility meetup, which has been going for around about 18 months now. It's got about 850 members, and we look at how enterprise agility is helping organisations be better at delivering value for their customers. I also work for Barclays as my day job, and just as a bit of a disclaimer, all of my thoughts and opinions today are my own, not necessarily representative of Barclays, and some of the experiences I'll be sharing with you are more of a general experiences and not related to Barclays specifically. So just a bit of a heads up there.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss some of the main challenges about reducing cycle time in large organizations, so reducing cycle time at scale. And I think it's probably a good idea just to clarify what we mean in this conversation about cycle time. And I think Dave Farley has summed it up really well in the past. He puts it well in his blog. Paraphrasing that, I think what we're trying to do is talk about the time it takes to change your production system from the minute you prioritize that change to the moment it's delivered, and all of the processes and waits and all of those things that happen in between. And just to clarify, when we say at scale, we're typically talking about global organizations with multiple delivery areas and the challenges that they bring. So that's really what we're going to focus on. If your definitions differ in terms of cycle time, for example, that's fine, right? What we can do is we can talk about your own context, and you can put into practice maybe some of the recommendations we come out with today, however you measure things. And with that being said, we'll move into the first sort of topic we're going to discuss.
Just want to quickly interrupt, Rob. I just want to make it clear to the audience that although the title is Reduce Cycle Time, we are going to discuss the areas which are very critical for organization to address in order to get a reduced cycle time. So you might not hear us telling cycle time every 5 minutes, but the discussions is around what matters within an organization in order to address or achieve reduced cycle time.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so I think the first topic we're going to look at is more of a cultural one, right? And as a I'm going to say the word, and I'll be shot down for it a bit later, I'm sure, but I'm going to say the word as a tool vendor. Really, there is some element of culture in what we're trying to bring to the picture, but more often than not, that's something that services providers, that's obviously something that's within the customer domain that needs focusing on. And so I'm going to hand over the conversation to Priya and Barry at this stage.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so the question here is around what are our boundaries to which actually are more cultural, which are may be like impacting our ability to improve cycle time and actually really add value. So some examples that I can think of, and maybe one of the most important things that I see and members of my community see, that I speak to on a regular basis, is a disconnect between the business and technology. And what I explicitly mean about that is more of a focus on outputs rather than outcomes. Now, I think a lot of the reason behind that is because because of that disconnect between business and technology teams, we are very far removed from the actual value stream, i.e. the customer, and in some cases, the delivery teams don't actually have access to the business users either. That is quite often hidden behind like a change function, and you get proxy product owners, which is obviously not great. Now, what does that lead to? Well, it leads to more thinking around outputs rather than outcomes, and we start looking at vanity metrics, things which don't really matter in the greater scheme of things, like story points completed in a sprint or an iteration, or like X amount of releases per day. At the end of the day, it's about how much value we've added rather than X story points, which really means nothing to the customer. So, and by focusing on outputs rather than outcomes, I think, and being that far removed from the customer, I think we really lose sight of what we're really trying to achieve by working in iterations and getting the benefits of DevOps and even reducing cycle time. Why are we trying to achieve fast feedback? Yes, in one instance it is to give to produce better quality solutions faster, but it's also to get feedback as quick as possible, validate that learning, and feed that back into the process and deliver better solutions. So, roughly speaking, in terms of my recommendations, which we'll touch more on in a bit later, but I think we should start, as organisations, as large-scale enterprises, start thinking more and talking more in terms of value, get an understanding of what value really is from an organisational department and product perspective. And then apply that and focus on cycle time, taking the idea, and not just a story, but the actual idea, which is adding value through to delivery. And by doing that, DevOps good practices really will follow on from that.
Are you seeing a shift towards a lot more of the business understanding moving into the development side of this DevOps piece?
Well, I think that is critical. I mean, it's not something that's new to the world. It's not like a revolutionary topic, but it's something that is missing in a lot of large enterprises. People know that we need to be closer to the customer and business, but actually achieving that in reality is quite difficult. And that and actually then focusing on value. So is the value the responsibility of one person, the product owner, or is it the responsibility of everyone, including like engineers? I think it's the latter.
And is that how you approach this, Priya?
I think 9 out of 10 customers who we deal with have the problem of shifting cultures, shifting mindset, or the challenges due to organizational setup in the space of DevOps. I agree with what you guys were discussing, but here I would like to share some of the areas which we recommend our customers to address in order to achieve the required culture and mindset for DevOps. I think that's the most challenge. If an organization want to bring a tool, they can bring in today. If they want to change the process, they can change the process. But the most difficult thing to address is actually changing the ways of working of the people who are on the ground delivering the value. So this is not the entire list what they need to address. These are some top picks based on a common pattern what we are saying. So I think the first and foremost thing is that organizations have to invest in leadership. And I say they already, it doesn't mean that I'm recommending them to bring another 200 managers or 300 managers into the organization. There need to be a leadership, a team who completely understands the impact of DevOps or a CI/CD framework within the organization, and have that ability to drive the change, have an ability to drive, transform the organization. So very strong leadership is key. A leadership who understands the impact, who understands the transformation goals, who can give just not the vision, but also give a strategic direction for the platforms and applications who are working for them.
And do they and does it help that they're, if they're practicing agile themselves and being transparent and all those values?
An agile mindset always helps, but that's not the end goal. So some of the things which the leadership team should address is a collective buy-in. For example, when I say collective buy-in, it's a buy-in from the senior stakeholders, from the teams who are working on the ground, the partners, the service partners, the tools vendors. Everyone have to be on the same page, working towards something in common, which could be, the vision, what they want to achieve, part of the transformation or part of the continuous improvement program. And also acknowledging what the real gaps are. The leadership team should be able to acknowledge the real gaps within the organization and enable the teams to address that. Take an organization who has like 20,000 people in IT and 4,000, 5,000 application. If they start to transform, they will end up transforming for the next 40 years. But the idea is how they can enable their teams in order to help themselves to attain certain level of maturity.
That's a startling realization, and I guess you're going to present that information in your capacity back to the teams. I mean,
absolutely.
How is that received when they see the amount, the volume of work that's involved in?
So the idea is not to overwhelm the individual teams. The idea is to produce. That's the key skill what the service partners should provide to produce a backlog. Let's say we're going to talk about these later in the one of the sections, but give a digestible backlog to the teams, give a reasonable goal, and also always relate the next steps to the end goal as well.
So Priya, what is your approach from a consultancy perspective if you don't have that forward-thinking leadership? What options have people got if that isn't the case?
So it's not it's a kind of a situation where the organization cannot have that ability or thought leadership within the organization. That's where we sometimes help the organization bringing in transformation leads who are actually worked in multiple transformation other companies. Yeah. So they bring the experience into it. So it's an element of it's a learning curve for the leaders or the managers themselves.
Okay, and there's a question come in actually from one of the participants around how do you balance the sort of we're telling you what to do with the autonomy that some of these agile organizations have. What's the right balance between command and control versus the autonomy of self-functioning teams?
I think it's a great question. In fact, we were about to talk about that in one of the later section, but we will address that. Basically, I think, in my opinion, the organizations can get better value from the service partners by not telling them what to do, by asking them to bring the knowledge and capability and trying to exploit their experience. And that's the great place to be. But again, the organizations, the service providers and the organization should work in partnership. It's not my preference. If I'm providing a transformation service to an organization, they get less value out of me if they ask me to do what they want to do. But whereas if they can work with us in partnership, we have an ability to bring experience from outside.
So setting goals and objectives rather than specific solutionizing, and ways about going things, but putting the goals and objectives within the context and constraints of that enterprise.
Absolutely. I mean, we need to learn. So when we go and we don't know the background, we don't know the history, we need to learn about the organization. That's where they help us to know, quickly get up to speed with the background of the organization, their challenges. But what we bring from outside is what's happening in other organizations in the same space. What are they doing? Where it's learning from outside. Learning is the most expensive thing. And if you can get that quickly by working with some of your service partners, or partners, even whoever it is, then make use of it. So that's where I see the value is. But again, there are other challenges with respect to demographics, and how you can transform while you're delivering. You can't actually stop delivering and transform. So how you can use programs and project as a vehicle to deliver your transformational goals or key capabilities. Those are the things which the companies have to think about, or the organizations have to think about.
Okay, yeah, great question, Martin. We'll move on to the sort of recommendation side of this, and where we see some real quick wins, I guess, and they're the recommendations that stand up. So investing in leadership that can drive DevOps, something that has the buy-in across the piece, because I think a lot of times, a lot of our customers and our prospects have that driven from maybe the development area, and then it's, yes, we are doing agile or we are doing X, Y, and Z, but if buy-in comes from the top down as well, that's where we see these things really working. And increasing that business engagement. I think Barry alluded to the fact that there's often a lot of proxy representations of the business value or the customer in this piece. So let's think across that stakeholder pipeline or the value chain. Let's think about the products that we're trying to deliver, and all take some ownership of that. And from my perspective, I think, and I would never come at this and saying that there's a tool that's going to change the culture of an organization, but there's certainly tooling that can support that more collaborative culture. And I think if you're then thinking about the information that's being shared across the different teams, presenting that information in a comfortable format for each of those stakeholders, tooling that can do that, I think has a lot of value, and that's our standpoint. Okay.
So that's, I think that leads naturally into the next topic, which is, I'm particularly, I wanted to ask you both that, again, this is back to Martin's, related to Martin's question as well. At what point does organization see external partnership make sense? I mean, there is a continuous dilemma about whether we want to build everything in-house, whether we want to take help from the suppliers or vendors. So what's the right time, and how do you think the organizations should do it?
Yeah, and obviously we've thought about this, and we come across this a lot. And the answer isn't necessarily just buy, right? But what we do see, and we see this again and again, is a lot of industry and a lot of effort goes into making something that is, I guess, fairly tangential at best to the actual original intent. So let's take the example of maybe some engineer who's looking at re-architecting some solutions, or looking at the product they want to deliver and deliver it in a better way. And part of that is looking at the new shiny, right? There are things out there now that can help us do the things we've been doing for years much better, being more adaptive, being more agile. For example, containerization, or moving into microservices, or moving and migrating into the cloud. Now, what we see, and this curve starts to describe this picture, and maybe it's recognizable within your own organizations, is we get some very quick gains, right? Obviously, if we start to automate and we start to change the way we think, and we are passionate about the direction we're going in, we arrive at something that actually looks pretty good. This thing that we used to do that used to take us a month, I have now been able to shrink down into a matter of minutes or hours, or even a day, right? And we see that happening a lot. That's engineering, right? Now, what tends to happen, and if we start to focus on some of the adjacent problems like the delivery pipeline for this, they're a bit second-rate thought. They've been developed just enough to get things working, moving, but they still form part of that overall solution. When that's presented to senior stakeholders who you're trying to get by, it's amazing, right? Of course it does. It's much quicker, it's much faster, it's less error prone. I can handle more. So we want more. Let's do this. Let's apply this across our different teams. This is the way. And that's where we start to see some of the problems happening, I think. I think when we start to dig into these solutions, some of the usual suspects crop up. So does this actually scale? Have we thought about security? Have we thought about who's going to maintain this? Does it grow organically or linearly? Can we actually benefit from taking that thought process and expanding it in different ways? And I think that curve, for us as a vendor, that first part of that curve is a lost opportunity. You know, it delays our sales, but it may actually be really important. And we'll come to this a bit later on when we discuss capability gaps within organizations. I mean, if you look at the graph, if we'd have only been engaged at the start of the second rise, saved all of that time, of truth to that. We can talk about how do we recognize that and actually use that aspect in our engineers and then scale.
I see this as an active approach. So
well, this is of what we've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I kind of larger organization in particular think about the strategy upfront, try and reduce the time spent in the first part of before seeking external suppliers, bringing external tools. That if they are able to think about their adoption, scalability, etc.
Yeah, I think, and we'll move on. We'll move on because I think there's a really good point in there that if you have the mindset that this is a thing we are going to try out and then build on, it can work really well.
Yeah, I mean, what things I think we think about are what are our competencies as an organization. Are we in the business of developing deliverables, or are we, for example, delivering financial services? A lot of people, that I work with, engineers, and engineers like to build things, but that doesn't mean that we should be reinventing the wheel. I think we should be focusing on the content rather than actually trying to rebuild like delivery tools that have been built out by people who are doing that as a living and also supporting that. Spent many man hours. If we decide to go down that route of building out these the orchestrations or tools to bring pipelines together, then we've really got to think about like the cost of ownership of this, like and how things change very quickly. And from my perspective, I really think like having or having capabilities to deliver software fast is more important than a one tool approach. For example, a lot of organizations try to control technical diversity. About that in a little while later. But if that gets in the way of people's capability to actually deliver their solutions, which are relevant to their enterprise, then necessarily the right thing to do? I'm not so sure. So really, what I'm saying there is choose the right tools for the right job. Think about like cost of ownership and return on investment. I think one thing that the Zabu Labs guys have got, which I encourage other software providers to look at, are calculators, which can show how the productivity savings that these tools can actually provide, rather than actually reinventing them.
Thanks, guys. I think what I'm hearing in general is there is, although there is a value in considering, the in-house or build your own capability. I think there are places where I think organizations have to buy capability so that they can focus on their core competencies and what they need to deliver on a day-to-day basis. And also, I think it's important the external partnership should be more proactive rather than or early in the transformation journey rather than a reactive approach. Could save a lot more time and money for the organizations. So on that note, I would hand over back to Barry to introduce this.
Right, so this one's how to get visibility on where you are and understanding your level of maturity. So we were talking about this earlier, and one of the things that I'm slightly skeptical about maturity assessments. If I'm being brutally honest, I think for a lot of people they find them quite intrusive and painful, but they are necessary, like in quite a few instances. Now, one of the reasons why I think they're necessary is because of the lack of clarity around business outcomes, and the lack of focus on business outcomes. If we are quite far removed from the customers and the business, and we're focusing on outputs, then there is a disconnect there, and and we need to think about how we can be better from a process perspective, which is not ideal, but it is a reality of where we are. Now, there is a correlation between better, higher performing IT organisations and actually those higher performing IT organisations. There's a correlation with actually being better or having a greater chance of achieving your profit targets and market share, and that's been proven out of reports such as the State of DevOps report that Dora produced, the likes of Nicole Forsgren, Gene Kim, and Jez Humble. That came out as early as 2014. So from that perspective, showing that we are better at DevOps and being better at Agile does have a correlation to being better as organizations and serving the customer. So a few questions really I've got for you guys, for Rob and Priya. In terms of like baselining, why is that so important? Is it relevant to compare maturity of one team to another? Is it, and from your perspective, if we are focusing on cycle time, how relevant are maturity assessments?
I think that's a good challenge, Barry. But they have the maturity assessment and metrics have their own purposes. We, as Sendata, as an organization, we have performed quite a few maturity assessment, and what we see is this is a kind of a benchmarking exercise, and it is important that the teams. It is important to understand internally where a particular team sits within their maturity level, but also if you think about organizations who are having a few hundred teams. Maturity assessment of one team is not a representation. The organization have to collectively understand where they stand with respect to the maturity, DevOps maturity. But also, it's important to understand where they stand with respect to their competitors, their challenges within the sector. So, maturity assessment is one of the ways. It's not the answer. It's a start. It's also, I see that many organizations use this as a tool to engage their individual teams or departments to kind of it's very hard for
is it, I didn't want to interrupt you, but is it something that you find is better delivered from an external organization?
Absolutely, because again, we didn't talk much about internal politics, part of the cultural challenge, but when an external organization is involved, you're seen as an independent body who's assessing a particular, and assessing is not really an offense to a particular team. Yeah.
I mean, So we talked in context of maturity models for assessing teams' abilities, but what about like more of like the organisation that supports the teams? Do you see more more focus on that now, or has that changed?
It's absolutely the way you conduct the maturity. I completely agree. Sometimes I don't personally believe in maturity assessment, which are purely score based and they go do within the individuals. But when we do assessment, what the objective of that assessment is how that particular team is performing, also where they are dependent. Let's say they're dependent on central services. We are looking at the impact of an entire organization, just not a particular team. But it's a kind of the team's performance is not based on the team's capability, but also their dependency on the other central organization, which reflects how the central organizations are set up.
And the overall outcomes in mind.
Exactly. And what we deliver part of that is a high-level recommendation plan, key capabilities which are missing, where they stand against rest of the organization. But there is a role for metrics in this. The metrics is something which can, this is, maturity assessment is just a starting point, right? It gives kind of some kind of idea. But metrics, identifying the key set of metrics is very important in order to keep track of where you are within your transformation journey. Are you on track to deliver your business outcomes? As Gary mentioned, how you can move your organization from output-oriented to outcomes-oriented organization. The common mistakes, generally there are too many metrics or metrics which are not connected to the outcomes. They are very much operational metrics, which doesn't actually make any sense when it does it give you an idea how you're doing. Let's say one of the outcome is reducing cycle time. Can number of defects tell you where you are with respect to achieving the goal of reducing cycle time? It won't tell you anything unless you have a outcomes driven KPIs or metrics. So basically, it's very important for organization to invest in a proper KPI solution, which includes a small set of KPIs which are directly related to the outcomes and business goals they want to achieve, and also a mechanism to get the data from automation or some of the investment what they're making already in that space. So we're talking about a kind of a how to leverage the automation to provide you meaningful data, which you can which you can use to make useful decisions. That's quite key.
Yeah, and I think we have a lot to add in that space. I think, and I take the point. Barry has kind of mentioned this in the past as well, that you could just measure cycle time, right? And if you measure cycle time and you start reducing that, the rest will follow, because you're naturally bringing stuff out of the picture. You're removing the fat from your value streams, and that's great. I think it has a place, and Dave Farley will definitely champion that all the time. It's something that's quite difficult, I think, in the organizations to just take to the board of directors and say, we're just going to do this. This is our plan. We'll reduce cycle time and don't worry about everything else. I think there are things to put in place that are easy to do within your organization. So if you are releasing software, let's say you're a software release organization, most, if not all of us are, and you've modeled your pipelines and you are now in the position to gather data from those. And for example, if you're using a product like Excel Release and you're executing these pipelines of change into your environments, and you're now pulling this information from it, you have a starting point, right? You have a baseline and you have areas, blockers or bottlenecks, whatever you want to call them, where you can start to improve. And I think what's really good is once you get to that level, you can start thinking in terms of your goals, right? And again, from our DevOps platform, we are working in this space as well, because when you can start to have goal-based analytics and start to drive improvements based on the data you're seeing, some great things can happen. So just as an example, and maybe this is the only bit of live demo that I'll dare to do in this discussion, if we've got the ability to, for different organizations or different teams within our organization, track against goals, real goals. I mean, when I look at one of these goals, for example, for this team, if I have a look at their project, and I start to understand what do we want to achieve, we can really set some tangible goals, right? We can say, I want to increase my speed to delivery, reduce my cycle time, right? I want to do this by a certain date, and I want to have a measurable progress against this across an analysis period that I define, right? And that means I need to collect those metrics you talked about. So if I now go to, for example, this project, I'm starting to see some of the pieces of information that we are doing. So we can baseline immediately against ourselves.
It's just not only about the end metrics as well. You have some clearly some of the indicators where the problems are from these kind of tools, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. And we start to talk about the metrics that mean something at the technical level, but we're starting to correlate them, and this is where the analytics come in, against our peers or what people are doing in the industry. And this is data that's coming from those sources that Barry talked about. So the DORA state of DevOps that indicates that high performers release more because they've reduced their batch sizes, for example. And this is just an example of where you can start to go, and you can build this yourself, right? Again, as a tool vendor, I think we can be big enough to understand that you can build this yourself. But at the same time, if you can just consume this, that's kind of where we come into the picture, right? You can then focus on reducing your batch sizes, and you can plow all your efforts into fixing these problems.
What mainly matters is what we decide to measure as well, Rob. The tools are great, but it depends on how you use them as well.
Well, yeah, obviously you can misuse these things, and that there is more than a tool at work here. There's definitely a culture aspect, and there's a driver for this. And from a recommendations perspective, we're seeing that these outcomes should be based on meaningful, well-defined metric. We should be investing in something that helps us collect and make sense of these, and take that baseline. How do you know how well you've done if you haven't measured yourself? Yeah. Okay, and I feel like I've spoken a lot about tooling, so I'm going to step back from this and just curate this particular discussion. I think this is one that we'll have fun with. But in terms of, how do we manage tooling? This is a confusing space, right? And we know it. We're a DevOps vendor. Everyone's a DevOps vendor, and I think Priya will go and discuss this. But how do we manage, as a large organization which probably has every tool under the sun somewhere within its confines, how do we manage that? How do you do it, Barry?
Yeah, so I think a couple of aspects here. When we're looking at enterprise agility, when we're looking at cycle time, the goal is to be, from an enterprise perspective, is to try and be as adaptive as possible. Reducing cycle time helps with that. But there's obviously a balance, so we're in large enterprises. We don't want to have like a proliferation of like a million different tools. That's obviously difficult to manage. So there is an element of controlling technical diversity, as well as being adaptive. So putting that in context, quite often some enterprises run like 100% managed service across their tooling, whereas others federate their delivery tools out to the individual teams. I think we really need to focus on how your enterprise can best serve your delivery teams. What's the best model which allows them to get on and do their job within the constraints of your organization, whilst still adhering to the standards and governance and controls that you have in your domain. sorry, Priya.
No, I was about to say that even within that, there is no one model which is fit for the organization as well. The tools, some tools are more fit to be federated, whereas some tools it makes sense to be centralized. Even within organizations, the model could be a mixture of completely federated tool set for individual teams for a particular capability, but then some of them it makes sense to be central.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like there's certain tools which are long-lived, which and live outside of the project or product team. You got your Git, your source code repository, you've got your artifact management, and those tools make sense to be a managed service by like maybe a centralized team. But you've got to look at your centralized team and see like how, in the context of your organization how big it is. Can you scale what you need to do? Can that managed service, can the people need to maintain it? Can they support it in the way that you really need it to be supported? Or should you lighten their load and federate some of the tools in a way that's easy for you to maintain the set of standards and stay on the current versions and apply bug fixes? And there's a lot of people are doing this already using containers and and basically scripting that up and scripting up those standards and that governance configuration into those federated tools and using the cloud to do that.
What's the biggest fear in this space, do you think?
Well, from the people I speak to, one of the biggest fears is lack of control and management reporting. A lot of people, managers actually want to see, how well we're continually improving, how our DevOps capability is improving, but you got to, and you can do that in a federated approach, but it's obviously easier in a managed service because you've got less instances and you get it almost out of the box. But you can apply that to in a federated tools. And also this element of this aspect of controlling technical diversity. A lot of organizations, a lot of large enterprises do want to have like one tool for one job, but DevOps tooling evolves very, very rapidly. Things move on very, very quickly, and I think one of the key things that we need to be and we need to look at from an enterprise perspective is to be adaptive, is to support that change and to use new tools and to encourage people and create an environment, an ecosystem where we can bring in the best tools for the best jobs. So here's an example of Stable Labs periodic table from a year or so ago, and then if we look at what it is like now, on the surface of it, it looks very similar, but actually there's quite a lot of change in that detail. There's different tools. There's the way in which we're thinking about DevOps is different. Certainly from a database perspective, this has matured in a lot of ways, and it has in other areas as well. We need to be able, organizations need to be able to move as fast as the tooling is moving, so that we can stay competitive and be as adaptive as possible. And that is a challenge for most organizations.
Just to reach out to the audience as well. I mean, just want to remind you, feel free to fire us any questions through the GoToWebinar meeting. We will do our best to respond to those, but also let us know, is this resonating with you? Do you think tooling has become a conversation that just gets bogged down in debates and arguments across teams and bake-offs and all of those things? And then how do we go about rationalizing and solving that? Is that something you want to close with, Barry? And then we'll see what Priya has to say.
I think ultimately we need to give choice to delivery teams, but we need to manage that in the context and constraints of an enterprise. if the enterprise supports a particular tool, be it Jenkins for continuous integration building software, then fine, and that's the tool of choice by default. But if there's another team who want to use TeamCity because they've got an awful lot of experience in TeamCity, and they can match the same level of controls and quality that the Jenkins users are, then I think that's fine. As long as maybe they're willing to pay for it. You can manage this via you can manage choice by policies and guidelines, and that's not to say, and that what that also supports is when better tools come out, or certain tools improve faster than others, it gives you the ability to pivot a lot easier, rather than having to do a whole migration from one tool to another, because those tools are already embedded in some parts of your organization, and you made them accessible to everyone should they want to use them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good segue into what I know, and Priya's going to have a dig at me. What I know Priya comes at this from, right? The tooling side of it may take second place.
Absolutely. I think we, as an organization, as a consultancy organization, we kind of take tools are secondary. We take a solution first approach. So generally, when customers come to Sendata, when we are approached, when they have a problem statement, when there is something which they want us to achieve. For example, if there is a lack of speed or lack of quality in a very complex legacy system such as mainframes, that's a problem statement. Our approach, we don't instantly think about a tool. We think about what we need to do in order to make a difference. That's a solution. Then what they have in-house.
But look, they're so shiny and lovely.
There are challenges, Rob. It's not easy. The last thing what the organizations want to hear is that we walk in with a proposed list of tools they need to have before even we can tell them how we can solve your problem. So how we can solve your problem comes first, which is our solution. Then we will look whether your tool will fit in, Rob. If it fits in, we will recommend.
Yeah, well, I think Philippe adds to this point as well from the webinar. He's saying, isn't the issue that enterprise architecture is typically too detached from the engineering and what engineering does? And is there really governance in most organizations? And then isn't, in addition to the culture, that governance has traditionally been about standardization, whilst now it should be about maybe experimentation?
So that's absolutely, it's a really good point. Before I hand over to Barry, we see this on and on. So in my opinion, let's say you want the team to be, one of the key principles is you want the team to be self-enabled. You can't actually prescribe every single tool in your DevOps tool chain. You should give the freedom to the platforms and teams to choose their own tool set for certain, for example, certain areas such as test automation, deployment automation. It is absolutely the right thing for organization to have a centrally managed selective set of tools. But more important is defining the capability framework. If this is my deployment automation framework, what are the standards? What are the policies? And if a department choose to have a different tool, as long as they are able to adhere to that particular policy and framework, then they should let them do it.
Yeah, to answer Philippe's question, I think really that some centralized teams, or teams which are actually defining the rules for the enterprise or the policies, would benefit from really sitting with the delivery teams on a bit more of a regular basis to understand their pain points and to understand why they need these different tools or capabilities. And then I think your engagement and communication and collaboration, key elements of DevOps. And if they do that, having that better shared understanding will lead to hopefully better outcomes.
I have a question on behalf again, to Rob, on behalf of some of our customers, Rob, one of the common issue thing which customers struggle is lots of tools in the market. If you go back to the slide, which has plenty of tools, they have an awful lot of overlap. So let's say I buy a tool A for a purpose of deployment automation. Tool B, which could be a release orchestration tool, has 50% overlap. So the common struggle which I see is, although these tools are defined for different purposes, the customers often, okay, I bought this, which is almost doing the other thing. Let me try and do the other thing with this tool as well. So it's kind of a confusing space for any capability. If they take, they have at least 10 or 15 tools to look into.
Yeah.
By the time they need to do a POC or evaluation, they have another, good, 10, 5 or 6 tools. So there's a lot out there.
Yeah, so I think your question is, how do you recover from the non-solution approach to trying to sort this out?
Exactly.
And it goes back to Philippe's question about where architecture fitted into this picture. And typically they would look at the capabilities that are trying to be achieved, but maybe what's not necessarily been happening is that rapid understanding of what capabilities we need to address and where they are. And for our part, while we sell a DevOps platform and really help our organizations pinpoint certain capabilities, that's not true of all tooling out there. We do try to categorize this, and I think that's the only pragmatic approach.
This is not specifically against a tool, but I'm saying this is something which the customers again struggle with because
they've got loads of capabilities, and again, they've also got resources that know how to use those.
That's the key.
And Barry alluded to that as well. There may be a team that actually favors a certain way of working because that's the technology platform they've grown up with. That's not to say it's wrong, but yeah, I'm not saying it's an easy challenge to solve. We're all DevOps tools these days. So from a recommendation perspective, I think it's clear that you favor the capability and adaptiveness. That's the kind of both sides of Philippe's coin. What we also see from that is actually coupling the solution from the tooling where you can, right? And that allows you to adapt if things change or a new shiny comes along that actually does things better.
That's a very, very, very important point for organizations.
And I think if you're starting to think in terms of managing this as a service, the bottom line is it's got to be better than what was there before. Are you really, on the whole, holistically speaking, taking the load off the teams? Are you removing some friction from their process?
So, reducing cycle time typically involves increasing the level of automation. But how do we start? What do you look for in terms of what to change? And how do you promote enterprise standards and quality guidelines as part of this process? So again, I think this probably question is for Priya to answer first.
So I guess some of the key the change or the shift in the vision statement or some of the key business outcomes, what I'm saying, the organization recognize it's just not about reducing the cycle time. It's just not about taking the ideas to production quickly, but it's very important it has to be safe. So I'm seeing more and more these days organizations acknowledge that they have the safety, they have the quality in the vision statement or in their outcomes. So there is definitely an acknowledgement from all parties on that.
So is slower safer?
I was just about to say.
Okay, no, you can't have a go at me. I'm just saying. I'm just saying that you can be safer while you're quicker, but you got to give importance to the quality assurance testing, and also sometimes what is actually slowing down the compliance. Lots of controls are in place. typically in some of the organization I work with, to make a couple of lines of code change, you would end up submitting around 80 documents, which is not you can be DevOps, you can do CI/CD, but end of the day, if you need to submit 80 documents, you're going to be slow anyway. But these controls are in place because it is addressing some of the audit points, it's addressing some of the historical issues which the organization have. So my point here is the testing, quality assurance, QA function have to be realigned with respect to DevOps in the light of DevOps and CI/CD.
And those goals.
And those goals, as well as the compliance have to be much more leaner. But doesn't mean that if you can't go into a central compliance governance board and say, actually, you know what, I'm not going to submit these many documents, but we have to, because we are doing automated CI/CD and we want to deliver the code into production in an automated way. They're going to freak out. You're not going to go anywhere. But there is an element of making the central SDLC governance board to understand what the CI/CD, there's a bit of an education which is involved. And also there's an element of renegotiating some of the controls in the context of DevOps and CI/CD framework, which necessarily doesn't mean you're removing controls. There could be an element of adding controls as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, obviously if you're automating the more manual tasks that you're automating, the more user error you're taking out of your pipeline. And not only will it be faster, it'll be better quality. And I think that is possibly the message that is not getting through to people who probably in the governance positions as much as it really should do at enterprise level.
Barry, that's actually being practically very difficult because lots of effort has gone into automating your build deployment, but QA has been left alone. QA has been an afterthought. In lots of places, I can do 100 builds in a day, but do I have the automated testing capability in order to support, to qualify those builds? Probably not. And also, have I aligned my testing artifacts in terms of components and unit levels so that when a component, can I release only a module? No, because all of my test cases are aligned to a feature or a very broadly functional based test cases. So there is a bigger problem to solve. That's all I'm trying to address here. And also there's a shift about, or there is a change in the role of testing COEs and practices, central practices, because it's very common for bigger organizations to have managed testing services, central testing services. Their role in the traditional way is to provide doing the testing for a platform. That has to change as well.
And it could even be external.
Yeah, it could be even external. Their role is to be enabling these platforms to do quicker testing. Again, shift left right from the beginning. The platform has to own the quality of their code, not a central testing team.
It's got to be built in.
It has to be built in, and that's why the role of a siloed QA functions is no good. And also the role of these central testing functions and practice are drastically changing in light of DevOps, as well as make your testing to assess the business risk. Yeah. That's the most important thing.
I think what's really easy to do is to go away and take some of the findings of state of DevOps reports and say, do you know what? High performing organizations release much quicker and with less risk. Yeah. Therefore, we should release much quicker and it will be less risk. And actually that's not true. That's not the interpretation that should be read into those. They release much quicker whilst still maintaining that quality piece. But to do that, there's a root and branch change that needs to happen where you don't throw over this thing over a fence and that's the first time anyone looking at quality sees it. It's built into the pipeline.
It's a big change for many organizations. If you look into many of the organizations, they have developers, the core team have developers, mostly testing function is the one which has been outsourced. So that's why there is no built-in quality capability, and that's a bigger issue for many organizations.
So the one thing, or not the one thing, but one of the things that I like about Excel release that I have seen quite a lot of is the fact that you can template this and you can standardize this. You can build. It's easy for you to orchestrate the governance into a template and apply that orchestration across multiple teams. So you have that standardization and it scales, because it's not being manually maintained, it's being executed. You're maintaining it once, and executing it several times.
And that leads to this particular slide, Barry, where I'm talking about, if you see the middle layer, release orchestration layer, this is where I would like the template to be. And if you see about the SDLC governance, as we talked about, this needs to be leaner, but also there is an element you can automate some of the evidences from the automation what you're doing in your SDLC. So let's say your current governance is looking for a test plan to be submitted in order to push your code into UAT environment. What do you do with the test plan? But instead, can you actually push your automated test results from a SIT run into the service now using release orchestration template, where a person would be able to instantly interpret, or even it could be a condition. If it's 100% pass with on the SIT results, then there could be a control automatically set to move the code into UAT. So these templates are quite critical. Modeling these templates, which is in the context of your organization, is quite critical as well. On that note, is that possible to show something in action, Rob?
Yeah, well, I'll just show you from here. I think the screenshot speaks for itself, right? What we're trying to do, and even if you are that siloed organization, I think the first step to starting to get control of this is give people the visibility of the process. Why? Some people don't even know you have to submit 80 documents to a certain regulator as part of this pipeline. They don't know that bottleneck exists. And why? Because they don't see what that end-to-end pipeline looks like. And that's a barrier that we aim to break down. But once we can start to model that, even if it's manual today, right? Even if today we manually hand over just as we did yesterday, right? But now everyone can see this process. We can now communicate frustration, if you want to call it frustration, or delays or bottlenecks or actual pain in this pipeline, and people want to fix this, right? Now everyone's got a group consensus of what's going on. Those engineering minds get to work again. Why don't we automate this task? Why don't we go and automatically gain approvals and pull the compliance piece into our pipeline?
And many places, if this would fix the problem of where people trying to fit compliance retrospectively, they finish the whole development and then they just 2 days they put aside to fulfill all the compliance requirements, which is not a great place to be. But I think
do it up front. And again, it's easy for me to say, and I'm not going to bang on about this. This is one of the areas that we really, for want of a better word, excel in. But this is what people are needing to do, I think. From a recommendations perspective, I think making it everyone's responsibility, that's something that Barry champions quite strongly, and getting that governance into the cycle. And we talk about shifting left, but that isn't just a matter of executing a task in my CI tool. That's a mentality thing. That's actually thinking, why are we doing things in a certain order? Why is it the first time I'm seeing this requirement when you're telling me we're going into production next week, right? So all of these recommendations, I think people are starting to adopt, and that kind of leads us into, well, where do I start? What do we do? What's the action here? I mean, for us, right, I'll just open the conversation. For us, it seems simple, right? Model your value streams. How do we get our software from idea in front of our customers? This is the valuable piece, right? The pipeline is something that we can engineer, and there are commodities out there now to help us do that. And as soon as you've done that, execute, because you don't gather any data unless you're executing this. And it's only when you try and fail that you start to learn, right? That to us, that seems quite straightforward. I think everyone who goes to DevOps meetups and conferences is getting that.
So where do I start question has, you need to think from two different angles, dimensions, Rob. One is there are large organizations with a few hundred teams or few thousand teams. Where do I start with respect to the IT departments and teams? And also within a particular team, there are so many things which I need to achieve. Where do I start? So it's depth and the breadth. So I guess the most important thing, as you said, understanding your value stream is quite key. But this is one of the model. I'm not saying this is the model. As the title says, our recommendation would be every organization needs a tailored approach, which will fit in their organization, their size, their demographics, what they want to achieve, the current maturity model, etc., etc. But whatever that may be.
So bad news, folks. There's no blueprint.
There is no definitely blueprint.
It's a good drawing, though.
But idea is this is some of the very generic phases, right? Define, establish, active rollout, scale on demand. But what we do under those banners is quite key. So that definition phase is basically to understand where you are. It could be through maturity assessments. It could be where you are. But defining set of goals, defining strategies. Strategies could include vendor strategy, location strategy, your central resources, how you're going to manage your central resources, everything. So, and also you might need in a position to do some POCs for some of the missing capabilities quite actively and understand selection of valid DevOps tool set. So all of this comes in the definition phase actually. I would encourage as a consultancy organization to invest and make sure you involve the key stakeholders from all different angles, from all different levels in that particular phase. If you don't spend it, this is kind of like a foundation. If you don't spend enough time, if you don't get that right, there is going to be an impact in achieving your transformation goal or your DevOps goals, and it could be a lot more slower. The establish is really how I use this phase in with our customers is to really to build some of the flagship examples within your organization. So that they are the great champions. They are the teams who can actually help you to introduce the key capabilities into scale across the multiple teams actually. So show success stories within your organization. So establishment phase is really strategy which you've defined, taking the key capabilities which you've defined in the definition phase and see if it works, or use the establishment phase to build some of, let's say take 20 teams. And if you manage to build a CI/CD framework, a DevOps framework within those teams, and if they are able to release software into production, let's say within a week or 2 days or 3 days safely, then that's a great example. So in building those flagship examples and using that as a learning opportunity to make your framework more mature is key. Active rollout, again, supporting multiple teams to participate and roll out those capabilities is key. But more than anything, you can't scale without actually enabling a self-service model. That's very, very important from my side. So the organization, what we are talking about, they are having, as we mentioned, quite a lot of teams, thousands of engineers. You can't actually enable every single team. You got to help them to onboard in a self-service fashion. So establishing a self-service model is very, very important to scale the DevOps capabilities into your organization. It could be tooling, it could be process, it could be knowledge base, everything. So that's how I see how you can get started.
Okay, and what do you see in this space, Barry?
So where to start? Okay, so first of all, I think it's really important to get an understanding of value in your context and think about outcomes rather than outputs. If that's a struggle for you, then try and find a champion from the business who's more forward thinking than maybe you're than the other guys, and try and get them on board. Start small. Start thinking it from a scientific perspective. To start taking your baselines and testing your assumptions. Demonstrate your wins from a cycle time perspective. Like get rid of your low hanging fruit, but also you got to acknowledge that sometimes you don't win, sometimes you lose. Sometimes there's things that you do, or there's things that are outside of your control that actually increase cycle time, and and that's something you've got to highlight, and something that you've got to resolve. It goes down as well as it goes up.
But on that point, and that's quite a subtle point, that just because cycle time might go down or cycle time might increase in a particular area, it could mean that the benefits of the changes you made affect a wider area in a better way.
Yeah, so you've got to put it in context, and you've got to understand, the reasons behind it, and you've got to look at it from a sustainability perspective. So highlight. A loss, a short-term loss might lead to a long-term gain, is like you saying. So and communicate that out. And the best way of doing that is not necessarily to communicate that out internally through your IT teams, but communicate it out through the business. Get the business buying, get your business stakeholders to talk about it to your managers. Let's start collaborating more with business and try and get customers involved. Assess the reaction of your changes. And feed that back into your deliveries processes, and then repeat. Start small, show that it works, and build it out across your department, and then build it out across your group.
Yeah.
Start applying some entrepreneurial thinking and innovation across your organisation, rather than having that embedded in certain teams or departments.
Yeah, and I guess how we help in this piece is you want to start modeling these pipelines and executing them and gathering data, right? That's the only way we know how to help these organizations, because we've distilled very good practice, and I hesitate to say best practice, because again, from a tailored approach, there's got to be a certain element of freedom here, but allow the organization to represent things in a manner that it's not just limited to technical resources, or it's not just a business thing, a dashboard. It's something that I can look at and own as well, and model that process. And when it comes to understanding what's coming out of that, there's your data that you can use to understand if you've failed or not, right? And this isn't something that you can knee-jerk overnight and start to think, well, this build took a long time, therefore bad. This is something you've got to trend.
So I think that's one of the key point I would like to make is, at the moment, the failure is very much down to the interpretation of the individuals and the teams. Perceived failure rather than real failures. So some of these tools could be a great value in terms of understanding where they are, and give that continuous feedback how they are performing.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be afraid to fail. Improving cycle time will get you to a success or failure point faster. And you learn more from failure than you do from success. But there's a culture of hiding failure and not supporting it. And that's something that is cultural, and really we need to address across many enterprises that that I speak to.
Yeah, it's why I guess it's why gamification, some of these approaches to comparing internal or even against external gets a bit tricky, right?
Yeah, and when it comes to gamification or kind of massaging figures or anything like that, that's another reason why we should be looking at getting empirical measures and building that into our processes and our applications, so that you don't have to waste time reporting upwards, and you don't have to. There's no risk of embellishing it or putting a positive or different spin on it, other than what the actual data provides you with. That's another key element to this. You need to have empirical measures and metrics which actually everyone's got access to and are transparent.
Okay, Priya, is there anything you want to add, or
one another point I would like to add is continuous socializing of the wins and the progress what you're making within the organization is quite key. So talk about your success stories, talk about your Vince, talk about the changes, because most of the organizations are very good doing that in their initiation phase. There is a bit of a hype. Everyone knows there's a transformation program kicking off. Everyone knows there's a leadership team. Everyone knows that we are buying these tools, but the bus just slowly fades after 6 months, after a year, after 2 years. The people goes, okay, what's happening? Are they doing anything? And they lose confidence in these kind of central, transformation program and or the practice. So, which is a really bad place to be. So, it's very important these central transformation programs and the practices win the trust of the teams and keep talking about this, not just talking about it, make a difference. If you don't make a difference within the first year, you lose trust. You lose momentum.
Yeah.
You lose money.
I think it's communication and being transparent. Like the more people see that information, the more people will get engaged. And put it in a format and communicate it in a way that people can easily digest it.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, right? That when you talk about a buzz and the hype, that's something that terms like DevOps, and we're in dangerous territory of going into a whole new direction here. But that's some in one sense, terms like DevOps and continuous delivery and those practices or cultures lend themselves very well to grouping people around. But at the end of the day, we're delivering software and we're delivering value to customers. That's not actually changed since before DevOps was even coined.
That's absolutely. You're only changing the ways of working for everyone's, for better results. Yeah. So you're not changing what you deliver. You're trying to change the way you deliver. As I said, the main thing is, just not
be transparent.
Transparent. And make sure you keep informed your teams.
So before we move on to our kind of final recommendations and wrapping up, last opportunity, guys, to send in any questions and we can have a bit of a discussion, and then we'll wrap up. So I'll let Priya go through this slide.
I guess one of the key recommendation is make sure that there is a need for a central practice. While I'm not saying that the central practice should exist forever, but to kind of give a shape to the definition phase, or to initiate what you want to achieve, to set some strategic directions, I guess a central DevOps practice is key. The role of central DevOps practice is quite different from the traditional central practices. That's what we need to acknowledge. It's about liberation. It's about giving freedom to the individual teams. It's about enablement. It's not doing their job.
Yeah.
And they need the right level of authority as well. So often I see these teams are set up, but they don't have, nobody listens to them. Programs doesn't listen to them. The platform, authorities or managers don't listen to them. So they need a right level of authority to make the change within your organization. So just don't set up a central practice, but also make sure they're engaged with all the CIOs and the key stakeholders who will benefit from the transformation.
Yeah. And for my part, and there's a selfish motive to this as well, but don't just talk about it, actually make a start. Start stumbling forward if this is where you're at in your journey. A lot of organizations already have started, right? And there is a misconception that everyone's behind the curve. They can't all be behind the curve. So make a start, find out if you already have, and get involved and get the data so that you can improve.
So the key message is start once and move on. Don't start again.
Well, yeah. But the quicker you start to industrialize this, the quicker we can really help from a Zebia Labs perspective in putting a decent backbone to some of this. That's my selfish pitch.
Yeah, this really shouldn't be my name here. It probably should be Dave Farley's. This is his quote: "If you measure one thing, measure cycle time, the rest will follow." I'll probably just add a little bit to that, Dave. And this is like one of my plugs and pitches. Dave Farley, amongst many other amazing thought leaders, are going to be talking and doing a seminar at my conference, which is the CCON, Study of Enterprise Agility Conference. Later on this year, towards the end year in November. It's ccon2018.com. If you want to have a look at that. Yeah, so a bit of a plug there, but yeah, well worth attending. If you enjoyed today, it's more of that and some other good stuff.
I think most importantly, send your feedback. I'm not sure if you were about to say that, Ron.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if this message is for us or for the audience, but we all made it. A big thank you to Sandata and Priya, and a big thank you to Barry Chandler for helping us with this particular presentation. And we look forward to seeing you again in our next webinar in this series. So stay tuned to zblabs.com.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks from Sandata as well.